He was just an 18-year-old delivery boy surviving on the streets with nothing but his late father's old bicycle. One cold night, he made a choice that would cost him everything, or so he thought. What he didn't know was that the frightened old woman he helped was the mother of a billionaire, and his life was about to change forever. Stay with us. This story will restore your faith in kindness. The cold settled over the town of Crestfield like a curtain being drawn too early. The winter air pressed against every window pane, slid into the cracks between bricks, and wrapped itself around the narrow streets like a silent warning that night was coming fast. The sun had long dipped behind the hills, leaving behind a sky painted in bruised shades of lavender and ash, and the few street lights that still worked flickered with fatigue, casting more shadow than light. It was the kind of evening that made people walk faster, hold their collars tighter, and think twice before making unnecessary stops. On the far end of Elmwood Avenue, a boy rode through the dimming light with quiet determination. His name was Malik, just 18, and the kind of young man life had taught to keep moving. His bike, though rusted and squeaking at every turn, carried him faithfully. It had belonged to his father once, before cancer took him away. Malik had kept it alive the best he could, patching tires with old tape and oiling the chain with cooking grease when nothing else was available. It wasn't much, but it was his only tool, his only means to work and earn, and, on most nights, his only escape. Malik delivered whatever people would pay for. Takeout, groceries, medications, even handwritten letters when someone was too old or too tired to walk to the post office. Crestfield wasn't a wealthy town, but there were always people in need of small things, and Malik had learned to stretch every coin. Tonight was no different. He had worked since dawn, pedaling across the city with barely a break, skipping meals to make time, all for the hope of earning enough to pay for another night in the place he currently called home. It wasn't really a home, just a room on the second floor of an old boarding house with peeling walls, a stained mattress, and a window that rattled every time the wind breathed too hard. But it had a lock, and in Malik's world, a lock meant safety. He had one last delivery to make, just one more grocery bag to drop off across town, and if he made it by 8, the payment would be just enough to keep the landlord from changing the lock in the morning. That deadline pulsed in his mind with every push of the pedal. He couldn't afford to miss it. The streets were mostly empty now, the shops had closed, and only the occasional pair of headlights swept through the intersections. Malik's breath rose in front of him like smoke, each puff a little more labored than the last. He shifted the bag on his shoulder, gripped the handlebars tighter, and leaned forward, just a little farther. But as he passed the bus stop at the edge of Briar Street, something made him slow down. It wasn't the cold or the wind or the ache in his legs. It was a presence, a figure standing too still, too out of place in the frozen hush of evening. An elderly woman, bundled in a woolen coat that looked older than Malik himself, stood beneath the flickering street lamp. Her white hair was tangled by the wind, and she held a worn leather handbag close to her chest, her knuckles pale with tension. She turned her head every few seconds, eyes searching the empty street, and mumbled to herself in a voice too faint to carry. Malik coasted to a stop a few feet away, uncertain. He wasn't the kind to get involved in strangers' business, not when time was tight and his stomach was already knotting with worry. But there was something in her stillness that didn't look like waiting. It looked like confusion, like fear, like the kind of lost that went deeper than location. She murmured something again. Bus 19, I think? Maple Street? Or was it Lilac? Her voice trembled, not just from cold, but from a deeper kind of uncertainty. She took a step toward the curb, then stopped and turned in a slow circle as if trying to remember which direction her world had gone. Malik knew he should keep going. The clock in his head screamed it. If he didn't make the delivery, he wouldn't get paid. If he didn't get paid, he wouldn't have a bed tonight. The math was simple. But life wasn't always math, and something inside him refused to look away. He rested one foot on the ground and let the other stay on the pedal, torn between the practical and the human. Then he noticed something, gleaming in the dim light hanging from her neck. A small silver pendant, oval-shaped, resting against the front of her coat. The metal had been engraved. He leaned in slightly, trying to read. And there it was. A name, an address, Evelyn. 216 Greystone Hill. A part of town so far up the ridge that even taxis didn't like going there. Malik knew the street. Everyone did. It was where the rich people lived, the gated homes with long driveways and silent fountains. Greystone Hill was at least an hour away by bike, and most of it uphill. He swallowed hard. Going there meant no chance of making his last delivery. No chance at a room tonight. But the woman looked at him then, really looked at him, and in her tired eyes Malik saw something like hope. Or maybe memory. Or maybe she didn't know who he was, but thought he looked like someone she once trusted. Either way, she was waiting, and no one else was stopping. He approached slowly, gently resting his hand on the handlebar to steady the bike. "Excuse me," he said softly, not wanting to frighten her. "Are you trying to get somewhere?" She looked at him as though he had arrived from a dream. "I was trying to get home," she said with a small laugh that cracked like thin ice. "But I don't think the bus is coming. Or maybe I missed it. Or maybe I'm the one that's gone." He smiled, though his heart was sinking. "Do you live at Greystone Hill?" Her brows furrowed, and she looked down at the pendant as if seeing it for the first time. "I think that's where my boy lives. Or used to, or—" She trailed off. He took a breath. "That's a long way, ma'am. It's getting colder. But I can take you if you like. I have my bike. We can go slow." She blinked, confused. "You'd do that?" He didn't answer, just nodded and removed his delivery bag. He secured it under the seat, then tied his scarf around the back rack to make it softer. Carefully, he helped her onto the seat, wrapping his jacket around her shoulders. She smelled faintly of lavender and dust, and she clung to the frame like a child, unsure of the world. "Hold on," he said, and began to pedal. The road stretched before them, dark and winding. Frost edged the grass and laced the windows they passed. The air stung his cheeks and bit into his fingers, but Malik didn't slow. The weight on the back of the bike made every hill harder, every turn slower, but he didn't stop. The old woman hummed sometimes, songs that drifted into silence, or asked where they were, then forgot the answer. He always replied gently and patiently, "We're getting closer. Almost there." They passed silent neighborhoods, crossed creaking bridges, and paused once so she could rest her legs. At a closed gas station, Malik bought her a paper cup of tea with the last dollar in his pocket. She tried to insist he drink first, and in the end they shared it. Two strangers in the cold, bound only by kindness. By the time the large white gates of 216 Greystone Hill loomed ahead, it was well past 9. The mansion behind them rose like a sleeping giant, windows dark but elegant. Malik's legs shook with exhaustion. His hands were numb, but he had made it. He knocked, once, twice, and when the door finally opened, it was by a man in a housecoat whose face drained of color when he saw the woman beside Malik. "Miss Evelyn," He gasped, "Oh my God! We've been searching. We called the police, the hospitals." Evelyn smiled faintly and looked at Malik like he was the one who had saved her from the dark. Malik didn't linger. When the man offered to let him come in, to feed him, to drive him back, he declined. He had no time for warmth or thank yous. He had no shelter waiting. He handed the man a torn receipt with his phone number, just in case. And with that, he got back on his bike and pedaled back into the night. The city had never looked so large. The roads had never felt so empty. And Malik never knew that everything was about to change. The wind had stiffened into something sharper by the time Malik reached the edges of the neighborhood he knew. The kind of wind that didn't just chill the skin, but sank its claws deeper into the joints, the muscles, the breath itself. It scraped against his throat each time he inhaled and made the effort of pedaling feel less like movement and more like resistance. His legs were heavy now, not from the distance, but from the weight of consequence. Each turn of the pedal came with the echo of a clock he could no longer see but still heard. He knew what time it was without checking. The deadline had passed. The delivery was late. The money wouldn't come. And without the money, there would be nowhere to go. But none of that mattered while he was riding. As long as he kept moving, he didn't have to think. Didn't have to feel. Just the rhythm of the tires, the creak of the chain, and the dull ache building behind his eyes. He coasted down the final slope onto Jefferson Street, where the old boarding house stood like a hunched relic of another era. 2 stories of flaking green paint and sagging shutters, it looked like the kind of place the world had given up on long ago. But it had been enough. Barely. His room had a narrow cot, a cracked mirror, and a single bulb that buzzed when it got too cold. But it had been his. It had been a door he could close behind him, a place to rest, a roof. Now, as he pulled up to the front steps, the first thing he noticed was the darkness. No light in the window, no warmth from behind the curtains, just stillness. He climbed the 3 wooden steps, the bike creaking behind him, and reached into his jacket pocket for the key. The pocket was empty. A small ripple of unease moved through him. He checked the other one, then the back pockets of his jeans, then the inside lining. Every fold, every corner, every hidden place. Nothing. He sat down on the top step, laid the bike beside him, and searched again, slower this time, thinking maybe it had caught on the inner fabric or slipped through a hole. Still nothing. Just lint and the cold reality of absence. He stood and tried the doorknob, just in case. It didn't move. The deadbolt was firm. Then he saw it. Off to the side of the doorway, barely visible in the dim light from the street lamp, was a plastic grocery bag sagging against the wall. Inside it were his belongings: a folded shirt, a worn towel, a phone charger with a frayed cord, a toothbrush held together with a rubber band, his life in a bag. Taped to the door above it was a piece of lined paper with 3 words written in thick black marker: "Past due. Locks changed." He read it once, then again. His chest didn't rise, his body didn't move. Not for a long moment. He felt the cold differently now, not like a weather condition, but like a verdict. He could have screamed, could have thrown the bag across the street, could have pounded on the door and demanded an exception, a conversation, a moment of mercy. But Malik had learned a long time ago that life didn't negotiate with kids like him. The door would not open, no matter how many times he knocked. It was over. He turned, the bag in one hand, the bike in the other, and stepped back into the night. There was no plan B. No emergency contact. No one waiting. He had been alone for years, and tonight wasn't going to be any different. but he wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. He started walking, not sure where he was going, just moving for the sake of keeping warm. He tried a few doors, old friends, acquaintances, the lady who sometimes gave him spare groceries. But it was late, and the knock of a boy with frostbitten fingers and tired eyes didn't open many hearts. Most didn't answer. One told him through the door that she was sorry, but she had her own kids to think of. He understood. By the time the church bells rang midnight, Malik had stopped feeling his toes. The streets were silent, empty of traffic. He passed shuttered shops and darkened windows, each one a reminder that people were home, somewhere he no longer had access to. Then, as he turned the corner near Franklin and Fifth, he spotted the familiar back alley of Johnson's Market, a small family-run corner store he used to help at from time to time, stocking shelves, sweeping floors, carrying boxes. Mr. Harvey, the owner, was an old man with a bristly beard and a voice that could cut glass, but he had always paid on time, even if it was just a few bucks and day-old bread. Malik hesitated outside the back door. A single bulb lit the alley, buzzing overhead. The door was steel, worn and dented at the bottom from years of deliveries. He knocked once, then waited. After a long pause, a light flickered on behind the narrow glass pane. Then footsteps. Then the sound of a bolt turning, slow and reluctant. The door creaked open just a little, and Mr. Harvey appeared, wearing a plaid bathrobe and holding a steaming mug of something that smelled like strong coffee and stronger whiskey. He squinted at Malik, then let out a sigh that seemed to come from a deeper place than his lungs. "Didn't make rent, huh?" Malik nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Mr. Harvey looked up at the sky like he was asking for patience, then opened the door a little wider. "Storage room's dry," he muttered. "Cots in the corner. Don't touch the wine crates, and don't freeze to death on me." Malik stepped inside without a word. The store was dark, the shelves just silhouettes, the smell of citrus cleaner lingering in the air. The storage room was exactly how he remembered it. Cold, cluttered, but mercifully quiet. The cot was narrow and stained, the blanket thin as a breath. But it was enough. He laid his bag on the floor, peeled off his jacket, and crawled under the blanket. Every joint screamed. Every part of him ached. But his heart was strangely calm. He'd done the right thing, and maybe that was enough. He drifted off with the image of Evelyn's silver pendant in his mind, and her voice saying something about her son, her family, her home. Outside, the wind whispered against the brick wall. Inside, Malik slept on cardboard and hope. He had no idea that while he lay curled beneath a threadbare blanket, the quiet of a mansion on Greystone Hill had been interrupted. Lights turned on. Doors opened. A powerful man had just been told that the most important woman in his life had been returned to him by a stranger on a bicycle. The morning arrived hesitantly, as if unsure whether it had the right to interrupt the stillness that blanketed the back room of Johnson's Market. Light filtered in through the small dust-coated window in muted streaks of gray and gold. Malik stirred beneath the thin blanket, his body reluctant to move, every muscle stiffened by the cold and the previous night's journey. His back ached from the rigid cot and his legs throbbed from the long ride, but he didn't complain. He never did. Pain, for Malik, was an old acquaintance, familiar, predictable, endurable. He sat up slowly, blinking against the morning haze, then reached for his shoes at the foot of the cot. They were still damp from the night frost. He pulled them on anyway, biting back the wince. His first act of the day, like every day, was to make himself useful. It was the price of the cot, unwritten but understood. He folded the blanket neatly, stacked the crates he had moved last night, swept the dusty floor, and emptied the trash. By the time he pushed through the door into the main shop, Mr. Harvey was already there, behind the counter, sipping dark coffee and reading a newspaper that looked older than the coffee machine behind him. The old man grunted in acknowledgement when Malik passed. He didn't offer words, just slid a half-peeled banana and a styrofoam cup of lukewarm coffee across the counter. Malik took both with a nod of thanks and stood near the front window, watching the town shake off its slumber. The usual rhythm was beginning. Children in puffy jackets dragging backpacks, delivery vans rumbling over potholes, shopkeepers unlocking doors, rubbing their hands together for warmth. But something was different. The black car pulled up just before 8. Sleek, silent, polished to a shine that didn't belong on Crestfield streets. It didn't park. It arrived as if summoned. Malik didn't recognize the make, but he didn't need to. He knew instinctively it was expensive, out of place, from another world. The man who stepped out wore a tailored coat and shoes that gleamed like obsidian. His movements were purposeful, his expression unreadable. He glanced down at a slip of paper in his hand, then looked up directly through the front window of the shop. His eyes settled on Malik with unnerving precision. He didn't hesitate. He walked up to the door and opened it as if he had every right to walk into any space he chose. The bell above the door chimed softly. The shop seemed to grow quieter. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice smooth, but with a weight behind it. "I'm looking for someone named Malik Thompson." Malik turned from the window, holding the cup in both hands to keep them warm. "That's me," he said cautiously. The man's expression shifted slightly. Relief, perhaps gratitude. "My name is Charles. Miss Evelyn Rose asked me to find you. She remembers everything. She wants to thank you." Mr. Harvey glanced up from his paper, eyebrow raised, but said nothing. Malik looked down at the counter. He remembered the torn receipt he had handed to the man at the mansion's gate. His name and number scribbled in blue ink. He never thought anyone would actually use it. He certainly didn't expect a chauffeur and a luxury sedan. "I appreciate it," Malik said, unsure how to respond to such formality, but it wasn't necessary. "She insisted," Charles replied. "She said you reminded her of someone very dear, and she asked me to bring you to her. She would very much like to speak with you in person." Malik looked at Mr. Harvey, who studied him over the rim of his cup, then looked out the window at the car again, and then back at Charles. "I just did what anyone should do," Malik said. "I helped her get home. That's all." Charles nodded slowly, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. "And she believes you gave her far more than directions. She says you gave her back a sense of herself." Malik shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the praise. He had never known how to accept compliments. He was more familiar with silence than attention. Mr. Harvey finally spoke. "Go, your cot will still be here if you need it." Mr. Harvey finally spoke. "Go, your cot will still be here if you need it." Malik hesitated only a moment longer, then nodded. He followed Charles outside. The cold air hit his face like a slap, but the car's warmth enveloped him as soon as the door closed. The seats were soft, the scent inside clean and unfamiliar. Leather, pine, something expensive he couldn't name. The ride up to Greystone Hill in daylight was surreal. The same road that had stretched endlessly the night before now looked softened in the morning sun. Trees lined the route, proud and unmoving. The houses grew larger, the streets cleaner. Everything here seemed polished, protected. When the car finally turned down the familiar driveway, the mansion came into view like a memory solidified. It no longer seemed imposing, just quiet. A place where someone had been waiting. Charles led him through a side entrance, past a marble hallway, and into a sitting room flooded with natural light. Books lined the walls, a fire crackled gently in a hearth, and near the window sat Evelyn Rose. She was not the same woman he had carried on the back of his bike. Her posture was straighter, her eyes clearer. Her hair had been brushed and pinned neatly, and she wore a soft cream sweater that matched the light filtering into the room. But when she saw him, her entire face lit up. "You," she said, her voice trembling not from weakness, but from emotion. "You brought me home." He stood awkwardly near the doorway, unsure whether to enter fully, to sit, to speak. She rose from her seat slowly and reached for his hands. Her grip was light but purposeful. "I remember everything," she said. "Every word you said, every street we passed. You didn't treat me like a burden. You made me feel safe." Malik bowed his head slightly. "I just wanted to help." She smiled. "And that is exactly why I want you to stay." He looked up, startled. "Stay?" "I don't know your story," Evelyn said, "but I know enough to see kindness. I have a home with too many rooms and not enough laughter. If you don't have a place to go, I would be honored to offer you one. Not for a night. For longer, if you'd let me." Malik took a step back. The offer was too large, too sudden. It felt like stepping into a dream he hadn't been allowed to have. "That's kind of you," he said, his voice low. "But I didn't help you for anything in return. I didn't even expect you to remember me." Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. "And that," she said softly, "is exactly why I want you to stay." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was thoughtful, deep. Malik didn't answer right away. The warmth of the room pressed gently against him, like an invitation wrapped in soft blankets. He would return to the market that night. He would sleep again among the boxes and crates. But something had shifted. The world had noticed him, not for what he lacked, but for what he had offered. And far from the street corners and alleys of Crestfield, a door had opened, not from pity, but from recognition. The following morning arrived not with the fanfare of sunshine or birdsong, but with a pale and gentle sky, as though the world itself was trying not to disturb something tender. Inside the back storage room of Johnson's Market, Malik had woken early, the way he always did, even though his body craved more rest. The cot creaked beneath him as he sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes and stretching limbs still sore from the long ride to Greystone Hill and back. The night had been long and cold, but there was something softer in his chest now, something he couldn't quite name, but felt each time he remembered the way Evelyn had said his name, as if she had been waiting to say it her whole life. He folded the blanket neatly again and went through the quiet morning routine, sweeping the floor, stacking the crates, sorting the deliveries that had come in late last night. He kept his head down, focused on the rhythm of work, but his thoughts wandered. Evelyn's offer had stayed with him, circling in his mind like a slow-turning wheel. A place to stay, a real room, a second chance. He had never asked for it. He had never even imagined it. Just after 9, the front bell of the store rang, not with the impatient jingle of a regular customer, but a soft, intentional chime. Malik looked up, and there she was again. Evelyn Rose, no longer bundled in confusion or lost in memory, but standing in the entrance of Johnson's Market with the quiet grace of someone who knew exactly where she was meant to be. She wore a simple shawl over her shoulders, a leather handbag on her arm, and her eyes scanned the room until they landed on him. Malik rose to his feet, caught somewhere between surprise and unease. She walked toward him with no urgency, just warmth, as if she'd done it every day of her life. "I hope you don't mind me coming again," she said softly. "I've been thinking about you all night." He said nothing, just nodded slightly, his voice caught in his throat. Evelyn looked around the store, then leaned in just a little closer. "I've lived in that house a long time," she began, "but it has never felt as quiet as it did this morning. Not even after my husband passed. Not even after I lost my grandson." She paused, the words catching for a moment before she continued. "You remind me of him. Not in the face or voice, but in the way you looked at me that night, the way you listened. He was always listening. He had that same quiet strength, and I lost it when I lost him. Until you." Malik looked down at the counter, his fingers curling against its edge. Evelyn reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The stationery was thick, the handwriting slightly shaky but careful. She placed it in front of him. "This isn't a contract," she said. "It's not charity. It's not a deal. It's simply an invitation. I have space. Too much of it. I have means I don't know what to do with. And I have the need to do something good, something that matters. I'd like you to stay, just until you find your footing. No strings, just support." He unfolded the paper. It was a handwritten note offering a room in the estate, a monthly stipend, and beneath that, in even the softer script, a line that read, "We'll help you return to school, if that's still a dream you carry." The world outside the shop moved as it always did. Cars rolling by, people rushing toward their routines. But inside, the moment had paused. Malik read the note again, slower this time. He didn't speak. He didn't know how to. Evelyn watched him with a kind of patience that didn't press, didn't demand. She simply waited. Finally, he looked up. His eyes didn't hold doubt anymore. They held something else. Readiness. "I'd like that," he said. "I'd like to come." That afternoon, Charles returned, not in a showy vehicle, but in the same car, practical and warm. Malik packed his few belongings into a small backpack. Mr. Harvey said little, only handed him a paper bag with sandwiches and muttered something like about time under his breath before turning away. The drive to the estate was quiet, but not tense. Malik watched the road unfold in front of him, recognizing turns he had pedaled through in the dark just 2 nights ago. But it felt different now. The road felt shorter, the trees less intimidating, the sky above wider. The estate welcomed him this time not like a stranger, but like a guest who was expected. His room was on the 2nd floor, facing a garden with a fountain that trickled even in the cold. The bed was soft. The sheets were fresh. The bookshelves were filled with stories he hadn't yet read, and no one asked him to earn it. Within a week, Evelyn's quiet promise unfolded in full. With the help of her son and a local education program, Malik was re-enrolled in school, his past records retrieved, and his schedule adjusted to allow both study and rest. It felt unreal at first. Going to class and clean clothes, sleeping through the night, eating breakfast that didn't come out of a vending machine or leftover bin. But Evelyn didn't treat him like a project. She didn't hover or pity. She simply included him. In her morning walks, in her conversations about the world, in the ideas she had shelved long ago but now dusted off because he was there to hear them. It was Malik who suggested the idea first. A fund, a foundation, something for other kids who had nothing, for the elderly who had no one, for people like them who had slipped between the cracks. Together they built it, the Willow Light Fund. named for the street she couldn't remember that night, and for the light he had carried on that long, freezing ride. They started small, a few grants, a shelter upgrade, a read-in program for youth. But it grew. Malik met with counselors, designed flyers, spoke at events. Not because he liked the spotlight, but because he believed in the message. And yet, even with all the changes, he kept the bike. The old, rusted thing with a creaking chain and chipped pedals. He cleaned it, repaired it, and sometimes still rode it into town, not because he had to, but because it reminded him of where he began. Each time he passed the bus stop on Briar Street, he slowed just a little. He looked at the bench where Evelyn had once stood in the dark, frightened and alone. He would tip his head to the sky, as if to thank the wind itself for carrying her voice to him that night. Because sometimes home doesn't look like a house. Sometimes it's a moment, a choice, a stranger who stopped when no one else did. And sometimes the thing you save is not just someone else's life, but your own. Thank you for staying with us through this powerful story. If it moved you even a little, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It helps us bring more stories like this to life. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? We'd love to know.